I'd like to move on to talk about Ivan Sutherland's role, and he'll chat with us a bit. But as in conversation with Ivan earlier today, he said, as you see, he's in your program, the godfather of virtual reality. But what you might see, he was a little concerned about one of his earlier monikers was father of computer graphics, and he said, well, as you know, and as most of you know, that wasn't good enough because, especially we as fathers, we know we're not listened to that often. So the godfather of computer graphics certainly carries more weight. But Ivan, 1963 PhD thesis, developed a precursor to the graphical the GUI, and called Sketchpad, and started us down. I'm going to run around. I'm going to turn left over here. Started us down the path to computer-aided design. I'll see if I can't find. Jim was standing right here, and it actually was fairly successful. I'll stop moving. The personal computer was in drop-down menus and things that we use all the time, including touch devices. And Mr. Sutherland's induction into the Inventors Hall of Fame this year was a culminating award. He is also the recipient of the U.S. National Academy of Engineering Zoic Award. In 1972, the association of, and so you can read it for yourself because Ivan wants to talk.
It would take my entire allotted time with just the introduction. I've been around a long time. I'm probably the oldest person in them. 78. Anybody older than 78? I didn't think so. So all that stuff I did as a young man was done by some much younger person whose name I just happened to share. In about 1961, I discovered I could use the biggest computer in the world. It really was the biggest computer in the world. And I did this thing, made drawings on a screen, and people had never seen anything like that before, and they said, wow. And I had no idea what would come out of that. I just did it because I thought it was interesting. Now, education is really important. I was the son of a mother who was an educator and a father who was a very fine engineer, and they spent a large part of their effort bringing up their two boys, trying to educate them. So I had to memorize poetry for my mother. I had to learn how to recognize different kinds of bridges and other structures. With my father, it was wonderful fun. I didn't think of it as hard work. It was just what we did, and it was fun. And I think the way to capture young people is to let them have things that they think are fun. I've been having fun all my life. I can argue that I've never done a day's work because the things that I do are creative and I think of them as fun. When Marley and I moved to Portland, we went in to see the Dean of Engineering at Portland State and said, we'd like to start a laboratory in your school. Would that be okay with you? And we were told, yes, that'd be okay, but you'll have to figure out how to pay for it yourself. So we got in the money-raising business. We've been quite successful. We graduated our second PhD just this year. We got a couple more in the pipe, and we'll bring in more as time goes on. I'd like to just tell you a few stories that go back a few years. The first one was a conversation I had with Sir Maurice Wilkes. Sir Maurice Wilkes built the very first stored program computer in England in 1948. And he told the story of putting into it the very first computer program that had ever been written. He said it was a program to compute prime numbers. And he said, I prepared it with the utmost care. And I put it into the computer in the full expectation that it would work. It was then that I discovered debugging. It is true that when you write a computer program, it almost certainly will not work. And the problem is that computers do just what you tell them to, and not what you intended them to do. There was a man named Warren Titleman who wrote a program for the Lisp programming language, which looked at your program and tried to figure out what you intended to do. And his program had the acronym DWIM, do what I mean. Now, in my cell phone, when I text, I have a spelling corrector which fills in words for me and so on. And if you've had experience with that kind of thing, you know that that acronym, DWIM, stands for Dan Warren's Infernal Meddling. With friends like these, who needs enemies? But dealing with computers, you learn to think clearly about what you really want. What do you really intend? And it seems to me that a large part of primary and secondary education is training people to think clearly about what is the real problem that they face, what is the real task that they need to undertake. That clear thinking is an important ingredient of education. I was invited to an alumni meeting at Carnegie Mellon University, and a lady named, I think her name was Lynn Morgenthaler, was one of the trustees, and she had invited a number of alumni to come to a special meeting. I think it was actually a fundraising meeting. And we had a round table, and she introduced various topics, and one topic she introduced was, what did you learn at Carnegie Tech? Well, fortunately, I was sitting next to her, and so the conversation went around the table away from me, so I had time to think about what was I going to answer. And all of the other alums said, I learned to think, 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 I learned to think. Came my turn. Now, I've spent a career trying to think. I've been in the research business for a long time, and one has to really think hard to work on problems for which no one has yet got the answer. And I told them that. I said, I've spent a lifetime trying to think, and I find it very hard. Gee, I wish I'd paid more attention in class. So how do you learn to think? And it seems to me there's a couple of places in secondary education where that's really the subject, although you do something else. And computing has got to be on that list. That in order to do computer programming well, or even to understand what a computer is doing, you need to think clearly about what's going on. I think writing English prose is another place. It occurred to me some long time ago that one could teach first graders composition. Well, they can't even write yet. They haven't got the manual skills to put, letters onto paper. On the other hand, everybody has experience with an answering machine. And why can't a first grader be taught what are the ingredients of the kind of message that you should leave on an answering machine? There are half a dozen things. Who are you? Why are you calling? What time is it? Is action expected on the person who's going to get the message? And if so, what is the action? And it seems to me that having young children practice that kind of structured thinking would help. Why not? They don't need to write in order to do English composition. They just need to be able to talk. And at that age, they talk a lot. I had a graduate student at Caltech by the name of Ron Ayers. He's dead now, so I can tell stories about him. Ron Ayers was a fine cellist, and he was a very clear thinker. But his English writing was painful to read. Ron Ayers was a compiler writer. He knew all about how to parse computer languages and how to find out whether there was grammatical errors in the computer language. So I called him into my office and I said, Ron, have you ever thought of applying your professional skill to your English writing? It is, after all, just a language, and there are a few simple rules. Sentences start with a capital letter. end with a period, and in between you need a subject and a predicate. What? There are rules to English? Well, once he figured it out, he was a clear enough thinker that he could in fact parse his own writing, and it improved enormously. When I was first in the computing business in the 60s, language translation was a hot topic. Computers had been invented and everybody said, whoa, we'll be translating Russian to English in no time. And the poor linguists discovered how complicated natural language is. One of the examples they used was time flies like an arrow. Fruit flies like a banana. Now wait a minute. That word flies appears in both sentences. Would somebody care to tell me whether it's a subject or a predicate? You can't even tell what part of speech it is if you don't know about fruit flies and arrows. It turns out that subject knowledge is crucial to understanding natural language. And the kind of thinking that is needed in secondary education reflects on that. Learning to understand what English means can hone your thinking skills. I believe that only is the hardest word to place in an English sentence. In the 3 words, she loves me, I can place only in 4 different places. In the front, after the she, 4 different places. Only she loves me. I'm reminded of the picture of the walrus baby that was so ugly only its mother could possibly love it. She only loves me. Well, she doesn't support me, she doesn't feed me. Okay, she doesn't, almost, and she only loves me. She loves me only. She doesn't love my brother, she doesn't love anybody else, she loves me only. And the last one is she loves me only at the end. That's a little harder because it's not clear to what the only applies. I'm only going to the grocery store. Are you planning to come back? I'm going only to the grocery store. You're not going to run any other errands at the same time. And I think it's that kind of thinking about natural language that can help young people learn about the structure of ideas. I'd like to suggest that the relationship between natural language and computing is strong. My office sits halfway between the electrical engineers and the computer scientists. And as an electrical engineer by training, I'm welcome on either side of the corridor. And I find very amusing the following experience. If I go to the computer science people and I say, I'm going to make a list structure, I'm going to be able to represent lists in the computer, the first question they ask me is, what are you going to do about a list that's empty? I'm going to be able to represent an empty list. I have to if I'm going to represent lists generally. I go across the halls with electrical engineers and I talk about a bus, which is a collection of wires that's going to carry information from here to there. And of course, the number of wires in the bus is important, and how they're structured, whether they're grouped in some way and so on, that's all very important. And so I go to them and I say, I have a language which is going to represent buses for you. And by the way, my language includes the ability to represent an empty bus. You've got to be kidding, a bus with no wires in it? That's ridiculous. Well, is it ridiculous or not? And these are the questions for which careful thinking is required. The questions, I think, that help folk think clearly. Thank you.